I'm Sharon Austin, professor of political science here at UF, and I've been working at UF for the last 20 years. And I, along with a group of faculty, staff, and also graduate students, applied for and received a racial justice grant at UF. And we are looking at Black faculty and staff recruitment and retention at UF. So that's the title of this virtual town hall tonight. And I want to thank you all for coming out. So I just want to give you just a brief overview. I'm not going to take up too much time. I just want to just give a brief introduction, tell you a little bit about the grant. And then when I finish, you'll hear a presentation from Professor Hazel Levy, and also another presentation that was made by some research in a documentary that was made by George Topalidis, in looking at Black faculty and staff recruitment and retention based on interviews that the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program conducted. And then finally, we'll have a discussion with Dr. Ozuzu from 6:50 to 7:20, Dr. Onye Ozuzu. And so that will be the format. And also, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, because I'll be taking down the questions, and then at the end, we'll have a Q&A session. So hopefully, this won't be too time consuming. So I want to just tell you a little bit about our committee. It consists of me and also Professor David Canton, who is Associate Professor of History and Director of the African American Studies Program. David couldn't be here tonight because he's doing some research in New York, but he's doing some really dynamic things with the African American Studies Program. Dr. Paul Ortiz is a Professor of History and Director of the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program, and Paul and I have been working together for many years on different projects. And then the other members of the committee consist of Professor Hazel Levy, also Professor Michelle Manuel, Professor Robert L. Stevenson Jr., Rick Stevenson. I'm not used to calling you that. I was calling him Rick. Dr. Brunel Tripp, who is a professor of journalism. And so we work together on this, along with the assistance of Deon Winchester, who is the current president of the Association of Black Faculty and Staff, Dr. Kishmar Best, who no longer works at UF, but he used to be the director of the Office of Graduate Diversity Initiatives. Also, we work with Yewande Addy, who is a PhD student, and also Adania Fleming. In a minute, I'm going to let her tell you about another event that's coming up a week from tonight, who works with in UF Black Effort. And so I just wanted to briefly talk a little bit about the grant, but I also want to acknowledge the other members of SPOP. I'm sure George is probably going to mention Deborah Hendricks and also the assistants who helped with everything. I hope I didn't leave anybody out. And then also, I want to tell you, the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program, which is referred to as SPOP, conducted a number of oral histories with current and former Black faculty to find out why is it that we're having so much trouble recruiting Black faculty, but even more importantly, why aren't we retaining or keeping the Black faculty that we have here? So he conducted interviews about that. And also our grant was primarily interested in trying to do something to enhance the African American Studies program. As many of you know, I was director of the program for 8 years, and it was something that I truly enjoyed. I still work with the program and work with David Canton, and we are planning to bring the National Council for Black Studies meeting to Gainesville in 2023, not next year, but the year after. The meeting is going to be held on campus or near campus. And so that's something that this grant also was able to assist with. And also want to mention, as far as African American Studies, they're in the process of hiring faculty, and they have two new faculty who are coming on board next semester. And also they had 2 faculty come on board this semester. Our distinguished Dr. Stevenson, also Dr. Courtney Moore Taylor joined the faculty in African American Studies, along with other faculty who've already been working there, such as Dr. Vincent Adejumo, who couldn't be here because he has a new baby at home and his wife. And also Dr. Malushka Celeste, who is with African American Studies and Women's Studies. And so the program is growing in terms of the faculty and trying to bring about at some point departmental status. And then also Dr. Levy is going to talk about some of the data that she found as far as Black faculty and the numbers of Black faculty that were here in the past and present. I'm sure she'll tell you more about that. So that gives you just a brief overview of what we're trying to do. It's just, and the main question again, we're looking at is, why is it so difficult for UF to recruit and retain Black faculty on our campus? And what can we do to address the issues that they have found in conducting these interviews. So I'm going to go ahead and just turn it over to Dr. Levy. She will be giving her presentation, followed by George Topalidis, and then also followed by the interview of Deon Winchester will hold with Dr. Ozuzu. So without further ado, Hazel, Dr. Levy.
Should we give Adania a moment to introduce the?
Oh, I forgot. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, Adania is going to tell you about an event happening a week from tonight with UF Black Effort. So take it away, Adania.
Thanks, Hazel. I was like, maybe I'll go later. I'll be really quick. I'll share my screen real quick for a quick second just to show Dania Fleming, pronouns she, her, hers. I'm a PhD student in biology in the Florida Museum, and I'm in Gainesville, so it's the territory of many people, including the Seminole and Seminole peoples. And I basically want to share with you an event happening next week, but kind of a little bit of preview before it. It's about UF Black Effort. If you are not aware, that basically emerged out of a town hall in 2020 by Black Leadership Council, and the mission of the UF Black Effort is to unite all faculty, staff, undergrads, graduate, alumni, and professional students at UF to move as one collective unit with shared goals to realize Black liberation at UF and beyond thinking about beyond us, our time here, and also beyond the what we consider UF campus, so the environs and other aspects of things. And there's lots of goals that go with that, and it's structured to have all the organizations on campus be a part of it as liaisons with UFB at its core. And for that, we've established demands, which we came up with collectively using all those different stakeholders. And two of the main things that we do are town halls. So we're on to our third town hall that's going to happen next week, Wednesday at the 10th at 6 p.m. And it's actually going to be talking about recruitment and retention of Black members in campus. We have somebody there for the graduate student is still struggling to get this faculty staff person, so stay tuned for that. But then President Fox is also there to talk across the different entities. And so that's going to be again next week, Wednesday, same time. You can join earlier to get like a little bit of intro stuff, but it starts at 6 p.m. And then regardless of which member you are, we do online surveys to kind of get the pulse of how our Black members on campus are doing. And so you'll get an online survey coming this fall, we send them out in fall. So that's basically the main events. And hopefully if you're not, or if you have Black Effort, please reach out to me. I'll put a link in the chat. There's a lot of different things you can get involved with, and look forward to hearing everything happening tonight. Thanks for the space, Dr. Austin. And it's been wonderful working with you all, and look forward to continuing that relationship.
Take it away, Dr. Levy.
All right, here we go. In the interest of time. Oh, let's see what happens when I do this. Is that correct? Or do I need to swap?
Swap.
How about that? I'll get it eventually. So it's a huge pleasure to be here and to be a part of this group, the grant committee. And so my talk today is looking at organizing principles in higher education, particularly faculty arrangements. How are we distributed in space and into different intellectual sectors and academic disciplines? And then how can we aggregate and what are the forces that are kind of keeping us so separate? So I'm looking at kind of race, knowledge, labor, and space in faculty distributions at UF in particular. And with intentionality, I'm dedicating this talk today to my mentor who passed this year, Mavis Agbanji McKenna. I know a lot of you know her. She was the first Black woman hired to the tenure track at the UF College of Medicine in 1999, and the only ever to become a full professor in the College of Medicine. And there's one more Black woman faculty at the College of Medicine, Dr. Fredenberg, who was hired in 2016. So this pace, being a student in Mavis's lab made me realize there were a few of us Black students in her lab, and actually 75% of the Black women faculty in the College of Medicine were either Mavis or people from her lab. And I wanted to sometimes look at why did we have success? Why were we allowed to aggregate, and why did our aggregation kind of lead to our success? So that kind of leads into my interest. So I like to start at the beginning, but what is the beginning, right? So This study is trying to see if there are these historic ties to these logics or these ways of doing organization that are historic to the land that we're on. As Adenia mentioned, we're on the Patana-Tamaqua land. Not to mention UF is on land that was once plantations. Here's an 1860 census showing that in Alachua County and Marion County in 1860, there was more Black folks residing here than white folks. Now, if you look at the 2020 census, you can see in Alachua County now we're at about 20%, but back in 1860, it was 51.4% in Alachua County. And so we know that the UF was first started as the East Florida Seminary in 1856, and this was on indigenous land and excluded folks. And it wasn't until the 1950s that Black people were actually present as scholars on campus, and not until 1970 that Black faculty were present. And so these principles of organizing space and intellectual academic disciplines with race in mind, I wanted to see what is the persistence of that in how faculty are arranged at UF. So UF resides in Gainesville, which is nested in Alachua County, which is nested in the state of Florida. And so this nesting levels of organization is part of the study. I want to see how this nesting influences if there is segregation or not. And I'm focused because of this historic piece of Black-white segregation. This entire study is focused around Black-white segregation. So in Florida, the ratio of Black residents to white residents is 31 to 100. But and then going further into this nested organization within Alachua County, we have 31% Black residents to 100, 31 individuals to 100. And that at UF in our workforce in total, so these data are taken either from the census or from the institutional planning. There's this great application on UF's website that allows you to do a lot of these statistical analyses. So the workforce on UF there are 15 Black individual, this would be faculty and staff, to 100 white individuals. But if you break it down into these nested arrangements, you see that faculty, it's 6 to 100, staff 21 to 100. So that's getting closer to what we see in Alachua County, and students 11 to 100. So my question becomes, do these nested organizational hierarchical structures increase segregation or reduce segregation? And I want to look at that at the university level as well. We also have nested arrangements here. We have the larger university, we've got our colleges, and then we've got departments as well. Oh, and then I just wanted to show that these images are kind of showing that the organization at UF is not indifferent to race. You can see here for white people, the white workforce at UF, there's this pie chart that shows how many are staff versus how many are faculty. And then if you look at the Black workforce at UF, you can see that these numbers, this yellow to this light green, there's a change there, right? So there's not this indifference to race. So if my students showed me this slide, they would get an F. Okay, this is too many words and too many ideas on one slide. I know that. So I'm not really going to go through this. This is just showing that there's a theoretical framework that was behind this study because it was in a class on organizational theory, but there's this idea that organizations, the way they're structured, there's theories called institutional logics, and that there are institutions, there are these supra-organizing patterns of human activity, and there are these central logics that determine how things get mapped out, that kind of constrain how decisions are made and can be measured in the outcomes of how something is organized, okay? And so one of these principles, these types of organizing logics are making categories. I just talked about nested categories of how we reside into states and counties and so. Then making hierarchical organizations is a type of institutional logic. And then if you look at an organization like a plantation, there were racialized organizing structures, right? Where people were categorized by these perceived races, and that geographies were racialized by segregating folks into them, and then opportunities and resources were also segregated by geographies. And so if you can measure those types of racialized partitionings, then this would indicate that there are plantation logics at play. So my idealized model of this theoretical framework, I have to call on biophysical diffusion because I really don't know anything about social science. I'm faking here. What I know about is like biology and stuff. So I used the diffusion model to kind of create this idea that Within these nested categories, at these different entry points, we'll have these logics that are deciding what passes and what doesn't, right? So these arrows represent these organizational structural levels where choices are made as to what goes past. So if we have passive diffusion, then the composition at one larger level will be somewhat retained at subsequent levels. But if there are choices at these junctures, then we will see an active sorting at organizational levels, okay? And so that there will be logics that will decide this sorting here. And if we find that there's sorting by race, then we will say that there are plantation logics at these sorting points, okay? So these logics are applied at decision checkpoints, and they map movement into these organizational structures. So the data set that I used was an administrative data set acquired from the University of Florida through a public record request. The data included 8,000 non-terminated OPS and permanent faculty, 9-month, 12-month, and 10-month contracts. I looked at 571 different departments, 17 different colleges. And at the university, you remember that groups are nested into departments, and then departments are nested into colleges, and then the colleges within the larger university. And I found that 71.6%, and these are 2019 data, so I don't have newer data. I'd like to have newer data. I don't have. Data's not cheap to come by. So 71.6% of the departments that I looked at had no Black faculty at all, and 33.8% of the departments I looked at in 2019 had all white faculty. So I wanted to use these statistical methods that are used in looking at if neighborhoods are segregated. And the census uses some statistics that I'm going to use here to look at how UF's faculty are organized. And Massey and Denton, who wrote this book, American Apartheid, they're totally famous. But they basically classified these statistical methods into being useful. And some of them are like dissimilarity, like how even are people of different groups spread around. And then others are like isolation or interaction, are people of the same group interacting, or are people interacting with members of different groups. And so I use these statistics. And in 2021, a group used these same statistics to look at classroom level segregation. They were finding that counties were saying they had mixed schools, but then when they looked at the schools and they looked at the classroom level in these nested arrangements, they found that the classrooms were actually very segregated, even if the school had mixed populations. And so that interaction between people of different groups was measured. So I basically copied Clotfelter et al. And used their methods, which they borrowed from Massey and Denton. And so these dissimilarity indices, this is kind of boring, but for other nerds, I'm glad to talk about this. But basically looking at dissimilarity indices, and this basically means how many Black folks would have to move to a different department in order for there to be an evenness of distribution of them. Would they have equal access to all different intellectual spaces, right? And so it's not the best model, but that's the model that the census uses, and that's what I was going to use. And then this, looking at nested organizations, I wanted to see, does segregation at the college level influence segregation at the department level, or where is, at what point are these logics being applied and to what extent? And then I further wanted to look at interactions. And so these two indices here tell me if group X and group W interact, what's the probability that they'll interact based on their geographic arrangements or spatial arrangements. And then this PXX tells me if members of the same group are likely to interact. So this tells you about isolation or interaction. Okay, so those are the analyses that I did. And I'm afraid I'm not keeping time, and so that's terrible. So I'm gonna put my timer for 3 minutes. We're just gonna go with that. So this is kind of the aggregation of my data. And the gold line is looking at these, so we have these different colleges shown at the bottom, right? And the gold line is telling us the number of Black faculty per 100 white faculty. Okay, so that's what this gold line is showing. And then these bars are showing us these dissimilarity indices for these departments. So if you look at every department at the University of Florida level, 50% of the Black folks that are faculty at the University of Florida would have to move into a different department for there to be an evenness of spread across the campus. And then these are basically saying within this college, the College of Public Health, nearly 25% of their Black faculty would have to move. So you can see that there's a lower level. So this would be like a lower level of segregation seen in these groups and a much higher level of segregation. 90% of the faculty in the College of Dentistry would have to move into a different department for there to be evenness of spread. I just want to say, when you look at, come on now, pointer. Oh, when you look at, if you compare this to metropolitan residential segregation in 2020, metropolitan areas had the dissimilarity indices of about on average 52.8, right? Meaning about 53% of the city's population would have to move to balance, right? Well, you can see that many of our colleges are below this level, but some are like shockingly above that level. And so that's kind of the meat of that data set. And then, sorry, I'm trying to figure out my wheel. And then I further analyzed and looked at this nested arrangement of colleges and departments and found that 62% of the departmental level Black-white faculty segregation across UF is due to the segregation within colleges, and that 36% is due to between colleges. So as we get into these nested arrangements, the segregation seems to be increased. I'm not going to get this wheel right, I'm sorry. So then these interaction indices is what's shown last here, these PXW and PXX. And so for Black and white faculty, they're a Black faculty has a 70% probability of interacting with a white faculty, but only only a 5% likelihood of interacting with another Black faculty. Whereas white folks are very likely to interact with each other, and white folks are very unlikely to interact with Black faculty. And so this shows that even if we have X numbers of whatever, these opportunities for interaction are not high in our environment based on these statistics. Okay, and I think that's it. So there's lots of future work that I want to do. I want to disaggregate this data a lot more. Like, for example, conflating race and ethnicity, that's the kind of data you get, which is really kind of frustrating, and it invisibilizes groups that are obviously very important to note. I wouldn't mind looking at passports, pay scales, not to mention intersections, and then data beyond what I've looked at. And then of course I need to redo my analysis and do it better. So that's it. I wonder how long that
thank
was.
you.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's perfect. It's really, you had to 6:30 and it's 6:24. All right, so our next presenter is George Topalidis of the Samuel Proctor. I hope I'm not mispronouncing your name.
Yeah, that's correct. This is the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program, George Topalidis.
Yeah, Topalidis. So take it away, George.
Thank you, everyone, for providing me with this opportunity to present for you today. Today's presentation is basically the culmination of all the work we've done over the past 2.5 months. Several research personnel from the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program have participated in interviewing faculty and staff members at UF who are presently employed at UF and who have been employed in the past at UF. Basically what we're going to do is provide for you a presentation of some of those findings, the major themes, in the form of a short documentary. I would like to say that we do have about 30 interviews completed at this point, and we have another 15 that are pending. If you haven't been interviewed and you're interested in being interviewed, please contact us at the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program. I will put my email in the chat for anyone who wants to contact us. And also, I'd like to thank all of the researchers that have worked with me up until this point, including Mr. Kasamba Kokai, Omar Sanchez, Mr. Deon Winchester, and of course, my most recent colleagues, Adil Rahman and Fallon Johnson. Adil actually worked on the majority of the production of this documentary, so I have to really tip my hat to him. With no further ado, I'm going to go ahead and start the documentary.
Black Faculty and Staff Recruitment and Retention at UF project documents the experiences of Black PhDs and Black professionals in general and at all stages of their professional development, from childhood to adulthood. The goal of the project is twofold. First is to provide a holistic perspective of Black professional development for those considering the academic career path. And second is to capture the challenges faced by Black professionals at UF vis-a-vis intersectional experiences of race, gender, and class for research purposes, and so that future generations may learn from them. To that end, student researchers at the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program have composed a presentation of our findings from our initial interviews. The students have organized these findings into 4 segment themes based upon the testimony provided by the respondents. The themes are prejudice and discrimination experienced by the respondents during their formative years, prejudice and discrimination experienced by the respondents during their time as UF students, prejudice and discrimination experienced by the respondents during their professional years, and insights on recruitment and retention of Black faculty and staff at UF. This documentary presents examples from these themes in hopes of encouraging more Black faculty and staff who are currently employed at UF or have acquired employment in other institutions after being employed at UF to share their experiences. Dr. Rick Stevenson and Dr. Catrice Graham provided testimony regarding prejudice and discrimination experienced during their formative years. Dr. Stevenson was confronted by anti-Black racism from an early age, which was parried by his mother.
To a predominantly Black elementary school, junior high school. There were 2 white people in my high school, 1,200 people in my graduating class. When I was in junior high school, I knew when I was about 8 years old that I wanted to be a teacher. It was just something about books that I enjoyed. My mother started buying me encyclopedias. They used to have a guy that would come to your house once a week with these books. And my mother started buying me the encyclopedias alphabetically. And so I read them all. And when I was in junior high school, about to go to high school, the counselor asked me, what did I want to do when I grew up? And I told her I wanted to be a teacher. And she said, well, my father only had a 5th grade education. He had to drop out of school. He was born in 1927. My mother just barely made it out of high school. So no one in my family had ever gone to college. And so the counselor said, based on that background, I shouldn't consider college. So I went home and told my mother, counselor said, and this is what she said, you people don't do well in college. You should get a trade. And so I said, Mom, maybe I shouldn't be a teacher. I should get a trade. Well, Mama wasn't having that. She was a civil rights activist. And matter of fact, I was telling someone this recently, I met Malcolm X when I was about 9 years old because of her involvement in civil rights and the civil rights movement in Philadelphia. And so he's always been fascinating me. I always grew up, I imagined myself doing some of the kinds of things that he did for the community. So this woman said I wasn't smart enough. My mother wasn't having it. She went to the school, wanted to burn the school down. She's a little upset. The principal had to really restrain my mother from killing this counselor who told me I wasn't smart enough to go to college. And I ended up going, and I was the first in my family to go to college. I have a brother who's in osteopathic medicine. He does total knee and hip replacement. I have a sister who has a doctorate in theology. And so I kind of laid the groundwork for the rest of my siblings to attend college.
Dr. Graham positioned her experience as microaggressions in the classroom, which she found to be salient in her move as a student to UF.
Only the 2 years I was at the performing arts school, and that was when I realized, like, race was a bigger deal to some people than it was to me. Just little things. We had a history class one day, and somehow, oddly enough, it was with the Black teacher, and some of the students wanted to ask questions. Why don't Black people wash their hair every day? Or, like those kind of questions. And the teacher really stopped the class to dedicate it to that. And my younger self had a very smart mouth. I was like, I might ask some questions too, since we on Q&A today. And usually it's not to you serve people what they give you, that they realize how disrespectful or out of place or inappropriate it is. Like, it was cute. It was a learning cultural experience when all the questions were being directed towards the 3 or 4 Black students in the class, and we were all spaced out. So it's sort of like you're trying to make eye contact across the class with the other person, like, do you hear this? This is for real. And then when we started asking questions, I think I kicked it off, and it kind of set it off to where the other 2 or 3 were like, we're going to ask questions too. And it was like, oh, well, maybe we should stop this session. And I'm like, what made you think this was okay to start with? I ended up leaving art school and finishing out high school at my home school. But I would definitely say those 2 years gave me the armor I needed for UF and made that transition way easier. So it was a learning experience.
Dr. Fay Geary also shared her experience of racism as a student at UF and her personal response to the strain it presented.
When I was there, there was an exodus of Black students who left the University of Florida about 1971, 72. And Stephen O'Connell, I think, was the president, and there were some demands that were made. And the comment about Black students want X, Y, Z, we'll consider leaving. And Stephen O'Connell said something like, that's too bad, but I guess you can always leave. No empathy. Dialogue was cut off. I was one of the ones who stayed because I felt if I left, I had no place to go. And I was not about to leave after generations of people had been denied coming there. I said, I'm going to stay here. You're just going to have to deal with me.
Next, Dr. Geary elaborated upon the impact of racism and specifically segregation she experienced in the workplace.
And so I think the comment that I'm making is that racism, bigotry, was very much a part of the fabric of the University of Florida, the Florida Supreme Court, and all other organizations, all other layers of civilization in the state of Florida. Blacks had separate clinics to go to. They had a special in Tallahassee. I shared with you that at the TB hospital, which was state-owned, it was W.T. Edwards Tuberculosis Hospital. There was an A ward and a B ward, and nursing students from Florida State and other places, including Florida A&M, had our communicable disease courses there. And I worked on the B ward with Black patients, and the white students worked on the A ward. We had a separate cafeteria we went to. We did not go to the cafeteria with Black folks. We had a different door to go in. The only thing I remember we shared was the incinerator in the basement.
Finally, Dr. Geary provided her insight on what steps must be taken for change to occur.
And I think that what I have learned is that to make change in extreme conditions, you have to have a critical mass. And there were a critical mass of white people at the University of Florida. I know specifically at the school at the Health Science Center, who embraced me, and they embraced other Black people who came there. And without a critical mass on the ground, little change will happen. So the question is, how do you develop, nurture, and sustain a critical mass of people? And they have to be people who are knowledgeable and who have power. And a part of the people in my critical mass were white men who were very powerful in the system, whose voices could be heard, who lived in the neighborhoods of other white people who had power. So they could say, well, I'll walk down to John's house tomorrow and I'll see if I can't have a conversation with him. Black people don't have that luxury. Eventually, perhaps, but that's not the way it is. We've got now information through formal memos and now through formal emails. We don't walk down to anybody's house. And we don't see him when he comes out to pick his tomatoes. That's just not the way it is for us. So critical mass, and again, one of the problems that I see is we dip and dab around equity and justice. We dip and dab in it. It has to be a consistent, sustained effort with accountability at every level in the university. Every department chair, every dean, every vice president, we have to have clear objectives. And the strategic plans, if I've known them in the past, in many institutions have been incredibly crafted rhetoric with little measurable metrics and almost no accountability. And they come and go every 5 years. I call that folly and deception. And as intellectuals, you should not allow it to exist. We don't need any more hypocrisy. We're not fooling anybody, and we're wasting money and time, precious money and time of white people, Black people, brown people, everybody. We just need to stop that. So we have to have a game plan. It has to be long-term, and you have to have some responsible people who commit some time and effort to it. And I don't think that's a mystery.
And she concluded by sharing her experience of the role played by key individuals in her professional development.
The white men that I mentioned, and I must say white women too, and Black women too, but they were not in points of authority, but they certainly were very, very, very helpful. But the white men that I interacted with, we never used the word mentor. We never used the word power. They just said, let me see if I can help you. And they helped others as well. Now, I know that some of them helped medical students by giving them extra tutoring, having conferences with them in their offices, just treating them decent on a day-to-day basis is good enough for me. Just treating me as a decent human being, nothing special. Just share with me the same decency, respect, time, effort, expectations, standards that you share with others. I think the University of Florida is a world premier institution. I say it all the time. I bring it up in my discussions here, what we did at the University of Florida, because I think because of the University of Florida's history, that people are not willing to readily deny. We know how it's been, what it is, and what we must do to make it different.
Dr. Geary's personal experience provides a path forward for people in positions of power to help students and professionals in need of critical intervention for their careers to be nurtured. Her testimony rings true today as it did during her professional development. We hope you learned as much from this short documentary as we have learned during its production. The goal of the Black Faculty and Staff Recruitment and Retention at UF project is to document as many experiences and insights of Black faculty and staff at UF as possible. Please contact the project coordinator for more information or to schedule an interview appointment. The project coordinator's contact can be found linked in the information section below the video. Thank you for watching.
George, did you have anything to say?
Just going to say, if anyone is interested in contacting us, being interviewed, or have anyone in mind that they would like to recommend for an interview, I'm going to put my email in the chat bar here, and by all means, please feel free to contact me. And then in addition, just one final sort of plug here. One of our interviewees, Ryan Hope Travis, is preparing a theater production that is going to be presented over the course of 5 days at the Hippodrome regarding the Newbury 6 lynching. And what I'd like to do is sort of provide some information about that in the chat. Thank you all for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, George. That was excellent. And Hazel, Dr. Levy, excellent. I just want to call attention to something that Paul Ortiz just put in the chat about a new book that just recently was published. Dr. Jacob Gordon and Dr. Paul Ortiz just edited a book that I don't remember the exact title, but I know Paul just put something in the chat. And it talks about it's an edited book that has chapters about the 50 years of African American studies at UF. So it's been published by the University Press of Florida. Yeah, there's the link Paul just put in, African American Studies, 50 Years at the University of Florida, which is edited by Jacob Gordon and Paul Ortiz. And it just talks, it's a very good book. There's a link there if you want to look at a digital copy, and it's published by the University Press of Florida. So at the end, Paul, if you want to say a few words, feel free to. Also, I want to mention that the narrator, the beautiful voice that you heard in the video, is that of Yewande Addy. She also worked with us on the grant, and she was the person whose voice that you just heard in the documentary. So in the interest of time, so far we're doing really well on time. Our next discussion is with Mr. Deon Winchester, and he will be talking about Black faculty and staff recruitment and retention at UF, a discussion with Dr. Onye Ozuzu. So take it away, Deon.
Thank you, Dr. Austin. And thank you everyone for joining us here today. Dean Ozuzu, thank you for being here and being willing to share your insights from the College of Arts, faculty recruitment and retention.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate being in the room today.
Indeed. I think let's I think it's important that we begin looking back, first to acknowledge the contributions and the sacrifices of those who have opened the doors for us and those who have cleared the pathways that we traverse every day on campus. And particularly, 51 years ago, there was a cluster hire of the first tenure track Black faculty at UF. And one of the professors, Professor Elwin Adams, was a music professor at the then College of Architecture and Fine Arts, I believe it was named. And, here we are 48 years later, at the Faculty 500, UF has its Faculty 500 recruitment, and you were recruited in 2018 as part of that initiative. And upon arriving on campus, you immediately went about, or you were tasked with not only developing a strategy, but you developed the language whereby you then proceeded to recruit more faculty as part of this Faculty 500 initiative. You developed what was called a meta-narrative. And I would share that in the chat so that folks can have an idea of what it is. But can you speak to that meta-narrative that you developed, how you developed it, and how you were able to use that as part of or insert it, bring it to life as part of the recruitment process for more faculty?
Sure. Thanks, Deon. So in 2017, 2018, I was serving as the Dean of the School of Fine and Performing Arts at Columbia College Chicago, which is an arts and media college, Southside Chicago, serving mostly, historically serving mostly city kids. It's the less fancy version of the School of the Art Institute. We had 40% students of color. And for the 4 years that I served as dean there, we had been, like many institutions, liberal arts institutions in the Midwest, we had been reducing our budget. We were in the opposite financial situation as the University of Florida, who was hiring 500 faculty. I was planning to reduce our numbers every year. At the same time, we had been involved in an ongoing process of working to further diversify not only our faculty, but our curriculum. And so the conflict between having less in our budgets every year, but also knowing that our students needed us to change at a pace and with a plan for the future that was facing them and facing all of us and emerging, was a constant tension in that institution. And we did our best. But when I was contacted about the potential for to come to the University of Florida and have a discussion about joining the College of the Arts as its next dean, I was certainly inspired by the opportunity to participate in articulating a focal point for the hiring of that many faculty at one time. Coming out of the Midwest, I recognized immediately that this was going to be historic, not only for this institution, but for the field as a whole. Nobody was going to hire that many faculty in the arts in 2018, 2019, 2020. That was going to be something that would happen here. And so when I arrived, I think I had something like 6 days to compose my proposal to Joe Glover and make our case for the number of faculty that we needed in the College of the Arts. There, of course, the units within the College of the Arts had already begun their work articulating and arguing for needs based on the holes in existing curriculum. And what we discussed in the dean's office and amongst the unit leaders, or chairs, or in our college they're called directors, was the need to engage a conversation immediately about the future and about what we saw on the horizon or emerging in the moment as urgent needs for innovation and change in the system that we were gatekeepers of at this particular moment. And so we created a process. We developed a series of questions. We sent those questions out into all the units, and we asked the units to consider what type of faculty we needed in order to address that emerging future from the perspective of the arts, beyond the perspective of our disciplinary needs. So I think the phrase we used was, instead of thinking about plugging holes in existing curriculum, think about who you need to be in the room and who you need to be with one another in order to build the curriculum that we need in the future. And so you said I could share my screen. Can I do that?
Yeah, you can. Should be able to.
So we set off an iterative process. So a series of questions went out to the units. Responses to those questions came back to a central executive committee made up of all of the unit directors, as well as the leader of our staff council, leader of our faculty council, and all the major administrative heads at the dean's office level for discussion. The contributions from all the units were discussed, and we looked for areas where those discussions had overlaps and where people were amplifying and repeating sort of the same themes and the same ideas. A representative writing group was then put together with 2 representatives from every unit, and that writing group looked at those contributions and developed a draft meta-narrative. The meta-narrative then went back out in an online forum and fomented lots of discussion, lots of collaborative editing, lots of commentary, and eventually resulted in the meta-narrative that you see here, where we put out a call into the fields, our various fields, along with our job descriptions, that the University of Florida College of the Arts intends to be a transformative community responding to and generating paradigmatic shifts in the arts and beyond. As artists and scholars, we embrace the complexity of our evolving human experience and seek to empower our students and faculty to shape that experience fearlessly through critical study, creative practice, and provocation. We seek a colleague who identifies as a change maker. We seek a colleague who prepares students to access and unsettle centers of power in a radically changing world. We seek a colleague who will position emerging artists and researchers as catalysts for equity on local and global levels. This meta-narrative was, I'm gonna stop sharing briefly. This meta-narrative was, and still is, a component of every job posting that we put out from the College of the Arts. So it essentially created an ongoing cluster hire. And you'll notice that the phrase access and unsettled centers of power is redacted at the moment. The language is currently under reconsideration for editing by request of the Provost Office. That just happened this semester. And it's a reflection of our current, how shall I say, relationship with our state legislature. And that is an ongoing discussion that we are having as a whole, as a college as a whole, continuing to engage this inclusive process. But regardless of that process, we are continuing to use the meta-narrative and continuing to implement its ethos. Another important, I would say, sort of structural element of the way that we activated the rest of our hiring was the creation of an ex officio role on every search committee that we call the Provocateur. Should I pause?
No, go ahead. Yes, you are.
So the Provocateur was a term that we borrowed from performance artists who used it in the context of performances that integrated the audience into conversation with an evolving performance. The Provocateur in our context was an ex officio member of each search committee who was not from the unit searching. So if you were a member of a search committee that was searching for a new violinist to teach in the School of Music, a tenure track position, the Provocateur would come from a completely different unit, perhaps art and art history, or perhaps the School of Theater and Dance. So our intention there was to circumvent local politics and local priorities, and have someone who would sit on the committee and represent this meta-narrative to remind the committee that this was indeed a overarching requirement for anybody that we were going to hire. They needed to be able to teach violin, and they also needed to be able to fulfill the call of this meta-narrative. We also made evidence of success in facilitating, I'm not going to get the words exactly right, but we made an evidence of having successfully participated in work that supported access, equity, and inclusion, a min-qual on every job posting. And so all of the provocateurs received training from our HR director and our HR unit, a combination of our associate dean for faculty, Dr. Jennifer Setlow, and Barb Matola, who's our director of HR, developed trainings and engagements for all the provocateurs in bias, and helping them. They also worked with each other and met occasionally to sort of process the experience of serving as provocateurs. And we found that it was a productive methodology. We found that it attracted applicants to our positions who were inspired. I had applicant after applicant rotate in finalists through my office who stated unequivocally that they were there because of that meta-narrative, that it had called them out of their positions, that they were inspired to come to a place that would put that on their job descriptions. And I can, is it okay if I go ahead and share the data, Deon?
Yes, yes, please.
So these were the results of our,
Yes, and we can see the numbers,
Okay,
the percentages clearly.
So because of these efforts, we were able to successfully hire over the last 3 years, 32 new faculty, increasing the college's faculty by 28%. And these numbers show how that 20% increase breaks down in terms of its impact on our demographic diversity. So Black faculty members went from 4.4 to 10.6%. We almost doubled the number of Hispanic Latinx faculty from 4.4 to 8.6. There was a slight increase in Asian faculty by 2%. And I think the thing to remember in addition to these shifts, we had 100% of the faculty members that we hired, regardless of their race categorization, were respondents that fit the bill, if you will, for that meta-narrative call. So we have a white identifying faculty member, for instance, in the School of Music, who's an ethnomusicologist, who's an expert in Afro-diaspora music. We have a Black identifying faculty member in the School of Music, ethnomusicology, who's an expert in British music history, but whose research output also fundamentally exists in online communities where there is ongoing battle for the around British history in particular, and the exclusion of Africans or people of African descent in British history. And she was the only applicant that I interviewed ever in my career who had death threats as a result of her PhD thesis. And so our faculty have colleagues who understand and share and can push them on the conceptual, philosophical, social, and political content of the work that they're making. So in some ways, we hoped to recruit retention all in one process, if that makes sense.
It does, it does. You know, a lot of times, and thank you for sharing for that data and that information, because I think when we have these conversations about diversity, a lot of times some folks think superficially that it is just about the numbers. You know, it is just about, well, getting a critical number of Black faculty, 10, 12, 13%, whatever is your target. But we understand from what you've shared and your experiences that diversity is much deeper than that. Could you get into and share with us how it is that, and you began to a bit, how it is that you diversified not just the faculty, but the curriculum, the program, the culture, such that, you know, it can achieve your goals?
Well, I certainly haven't diversified curriculum at the University of Florida. The faculty do that. But I think that my time in the academy, I've been in the academy for about 25 years, and I was recruited as a diversity hire in a predominantly white institution in 2000. I entered into a context where not only did I happen to be Black, but my research was on contemporary artistic making from an Afro-diaspora base. And so at every turn, from my student evaluations of the way I conducted class to the methods and the tenets and the values of my research, I was having to educate my colleagues. I was having to educate my students how to take my class, how to view my performances, how to read my narratives. And when I was brought into context where the chancellor of the university I was at the time was talking about retention methodologies and was speaking the language of welcome. And as a junior faculty member, I stood up in the room at that moment and I said, respectfully, I can figure out where to get my hair cut. I would like to have colleagues that understand my work and with whom I can collaborate and with whom I can agree across the conference table as we discuss the values for our emerging curriculum. That curriculum is essentially the very core of the power that we hold as faculty to influence not only our experience as we move through the system, that is the educational system, but our influence in the educational system on the society beyond our ivory tower. And so in recruiting faculty in these sorts of clusters who come into the into our units already with a interest and a hunger and an intentionality for a shared conversation, we have an opportunity to then lay the groundwork and facilitate the context for that conversation to happen. And so in the second year after that initial year of hiring, we entered into a year-long strategic planning process. We did create a strategic plan that runs counter to the normal structure of strategic plans in higher education. It's a working plan. It laid out actual goals and work that needed to be accomplished in a short period of time in a number of pillars, and curricular change has already begun. 2 of our largest units have already submitted some sweeping curricular changes that integrate the ideologies of that meta-narrative, which in the strategic planning process became our college mission. And so I think that it's not necessarily, it's setting a tone for a conversation and having the setting of that tone be inclusive at every step and stage. And I would say just normalizing conversation about Blackness and racism in the context of a work environment. Just setting an expectation that being able to freely and with some measure of ease and historical accuracy, being able to talk about race, whether you're or not you're an expert on race, being able to talk about race in the context of having a role in executing the educational system is just a requirement for facing the emerging future that we all agreed on in the way that we wrote the meta-narrative. I'm not here to say that 100% of the faculty in the College of the Arts stand behind that meta-narrative. That is not true. We did not write something so innocuous that no one could argue with it, but we also didn't write something so overarchingly positivist that it didn't inspire anyone to do anything, even if that included fighting back. So we certainly have pushback to this meta-narrative, and we are engaging that as it emerges as opportunities for engaged, leaned in, effective and productive conversations about what matters most.
Could you share about the development of your meta strategy and your strategic plan, and especially how you incorporated the new faculty into that strategic process, such that, you know, we don't fall back in, and as you've said, settle back into known patterns of behavior?
Yeah, I don't have time here to go into the details of how we structured our strategic planning process, but it mirrored in many ways that iterative and inclusive process that we used to write the meta-narrative in the first place. We had working groups, we had open town halls, we had online discussions. We had working groups that were strategically inclusive of individuals at every level of sort of class within our academic system. So students, graduate students, faculty and staff, junior as well as senior faculty. We did everything that we could to eschew sort of the normalized idea that senior faculty's presence automatically meant that junior faculty couldn't speak. Again, not to say we were 100% successful always in shifting that culture, but we set up the configurations to support that and then emphasized it with our communication strategy. And we have found that more times than not, it seems to be effective, not to say that there isn't pushback. And to answer Dr. Levy's question, our associate dean of faculty and students, as well as our director of HR, have been asked to present all over campus regarding these recruitment strategies, and several other colleges are starting to put together their versions. They're using different names. The term provocateur is not popular. I like it, but it's not popular beyond the arts, but some other version of an ex officio member on search committees is starting to stand up in other colleges from what I'm hearing. And we have received no pushback from upper administration about our hiring practice or recruitment practices to date. As I indicated, we have had some questions about language, which has been happening all over campus this semester. I'm sure many of you are aware of those things. And I guess I don't know where we are in terms of time, but before we run out of time, I have a feeling we will soon. I guess I wanted to say that I feel somewhat conflicted being here tonight, because on the one hand, I do feel that if there's something to be called success, it feels like we were taking a few steps down a road that felt, yeah, like we were making a little bit of progress. And at the same time, between the day that I first stepped on campus here at the University of Florida and today, it does feel like there has been ongoing and increasing chilling in the ways that the existence of not only Black faculty and staff in our personhood, but the work that the research and the generation of knowledge that critically supports the existence of Black people in the United States is being actively chilled and suppressed. And so it feels as if the question of recruitment, I think, becomes highly pressured from an ethical standpoint for me, particularly sitting in the position that I'm in. And I am struggling with that moment to moment. You know, I asked Dr. Fox that question. What do I say to these 32 faculty who came here for that meta-narrative? What do I say to them now? We recruited critical race theorists whose work has been going viral in the last couple of years. They could go to other places where their work would be celebrated. What do I say to them now? And I'm thinking that through on a daily basis. What's the opportunity? I think that there's something powerful about the cluster. And Dr. Levy, I hope that you'll come talk to us, because I'm really interested in the mathematics and the shapes of those clusters, because I do believe that we are working in a much less technical way towards some of the configurations and patterns that you're talking about that may have opportunities for success. Is there a potential in having a cluster of artists hired under that meta narrative that just stay in the state of Florida at this moment in history? Is there something useful about that? Is that potential something that I, as a dean, should put before those faculty as a retention argument? I don't know the answer to that question. I'm asking myself. If anybody knows the answer, please hit me up.
And folks, we definitely, if you have any other questions, please feel free to put them in the chat.
We do have one question. Someone had asked, where would they be able to access this recording? So I'm sure, George, it'll be on SPOP's Samuel Proctor Oral History website. And George, if you could send me the link, you could also contact me, Sharon Austin in the Department of Political Science. I can put my email address in the chat and I could send it to you. And I'm sure Dave Canton will probably put it on the African American Studies website. So.
Yeah, SPOP will definitely advertise it and advertise today's presentations and the virtual town hall as a whole, and definitely the video will be up and available for anyone to view.
Yeah. So I want to, first of all, before I forget, thank you so much, Dr. Ozuzu. The work that you all have done is just amazing. This was extremely helpful.
Thank you so much.
Are there any questions? You can either put them in the chat or you can raise your hand for anyone about just the project in general or any of the presenters. Okay, Adania?
Yep, thank you, Dr. Austin. Dr. Dean Ozuzu, I had a question for you. Just curious if you have a kind of knowledge of whether some colleges are more prone to like adopt this method to the meta-analysis than others. Like, do you have a pulse for that at all? Given, thinking about especially like what Dr. Levy presented in terms of where departments or colleges stand, do you feel like you have any pulse on like which colleges are more prone to wanting to adopt and to try and improve things or not? And thank you very much for talking tonight.
Yes, I don't think that it's even across all colleges. I wouldn't be able to sort of give a report because I haven't sort of sought that information, but I know that there are several colleges that are sort of putting it out there that that's the direction that they're going. But I wouldn't say that it's a critical mass of colleges across the University of Florida at this moment.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
There was another question that I think that I think you may have answered it, but Dr. Levy had a question for you, Have you found that your recruitment methods have been supported by the administration? And how did they support or hinder your work?
And I kind of tried to address that. I don't think they have neither supported nor actively hindered it. We, from the perspective of I think that from the perspective of the Faculty 500 initiative, we have been hiring faculty within the structures available at the University of Florida. What we did was not necessarily, it was not radical. It actually wasn't that radical. We just wrote a note, we just participated together in writing an overarching narrative. And we had a person sit on the committee who reminded the committee to think about it. That person didn't vote. So they were just in the room. And so everything that we did, we didn't do some sort of a structural shift to the policy, to the existing policy. HR was fully aware of the process that we were engaging. And we weren't technically recruiting people for their racial identities, right?
Are there other questions? Raise your hand or post your questions in the chat. If not, I have a quick question for you, Dr. Ozuzu. What advice would you give to other colleges that are trying to increase the numbers of Black faculty?
I think we really have to ask ourselves the questions, what are we recruiting Black faculty and staff to? And like I said, I'm in a moment to moment, like I would like to be in community with you all in considering the answer to that question. I'm only 4 years in here, and many of you all have been here many more years than I. So I would like to be in positions where I can learn. Dr. Levy, your presentation was emotional for me because I think that, I wonder what your data would say looking across Black individuals in administrative positions and how many minutes of the day over the years we have to interact with other Black people. It's not a lot. And so I think that question, on some levels, I wonder, like, the longer I serve as a dean, do I become less and less qualified to answer that question, given the number of minutes of a day I spend in interaction with my own community? And so I think that we really have to ask ourselves the question and ask the institution as a whole to consider the question, what are you recruiting Black, even students, what are we recruiting them to? I think that we have this way of saying we're recruiting them to one of the best educations in the country, but in what context and to what end? And I think we have to just continually ask and answer that question and come up with better and better questions, because more and more young people, and I mean young people or incoming people, I should say, I shouldn't assume that they're young, but incoming people, faculty and students, are looking around and there are options. And so I think that oftentimes we use, a lot of the words we use, I think, have to be examined. We use the word inclusion. I don't know that I came to UF to be included. I think I came to UF to try to help. And I think a lot of Black people come to places like this to try to help. So are we going to help them help? Is the institution going to help Black people and Black researchers have the work that they do help our human condition? I think that there's a lot that we collectively need to do to insist on the centralization of those human questions, even in the type of context we find ourselves now, politically in the state of Florida. because I'm troubled by the way that conversations around Blackness are being marginalized now as political conversations. They are existential conversations.
I definitely want to thank you for your leadership. I think that when you look at the time that you have been here, I mean, certainly I have been on this campus for almost 17 years, and I have already begun to see the impact that you and the College of Arts are having. I mean, the folks talk about life imitating art. I mean, here you all are in 2019, talking about a meta strategy, and now meta being, part of the popular, lexicon, words that we use. But more importantly, y'all were ahead of the curve. And I think that as artists, as creative folks, maybe y'all use one side of the brain a little bit better than others. But I think certainly y'all have been a light that certainly has shone brightly on this campus and has been a guide for other colleges and other departments to follow suit. So we definitely thank you for your leadership. And folks, if you all are not in the loop of what's going on at the College of Arts, I encourage you to sign up for their newsletters. It's called In the Loop, and to check in with some of the great work that they're doing at some of their centers. For example, the Center for Arts and Migration and Entrepreneurship.
Indeed. I gotta say one thing, everybody's calling me doctor. I have an MFA. I got my tenure as a choreographer. My terminal degree is
Nice.
a Master of Fine Arts. So I'm Onye, or Dean Ozuzu, and it's really been wonderful to get to be in conversation with y'all today. I appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, we have two questions. The first, what could the university do at the institutional level to help the faculty, staff, and students improve a sense of belonging? And then a second question, with the question that Dean Ozuzu just posed, what are we recruiting them to when we recruit Black faculty here? Can that question be satisfactorily answered? So a sense of what can we do to bring about a sense of belonging, and what exactly are we recruiting Black faculty to here at UF? Would anyone like to address that? Hazel?
It's a good and deep question. And Dean Ozuzu mentioned wanting to come here to help, and so I do think that there's like a project, I mean, I was offered a job in industry and chose to come here for a lot less money because I thought it was needed. There was a need here, so I do think I hadn't quite put that together until this conversation, but like, we're definitely recruiting people to a project. And so that's not a great answer, but that's what I came up with.
Sharon, you're muted. Dr. Austin, you're muted.
Yeah, I was just pointing out that Daniel, you just posted something in the chat that you're going to be asking that question to Dr. Fox next week. I implore you all to join the town hall, which is a week from today, November 10th at 6 p.m. On the retention and recruitment of Black faculty and staff members here at UF. So,
yeah, and Dr. Austin, quick correction to that. So it's Black retention and recruitment of Black members. So it includes, we've done undergrads before. The faculty and staff person is kind of iffy. They're playing dodgeball with us, but Fox will be there, so we'll address some of the questions to him. We do have the grad person, and if the faculty and staff person doesn't show up this town hall, we'll get them next time. That's how we keep doing it. So it's a long game. We're here about sustainability, so we'll get them next time.
all right. Yewande, with your hand up?
No, it's not
I
up.
thought.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Okay, are there any other questions for any of our presenters? One of the things I also want to point out is George mentioned if you would like to be interviewed for this project, you can contact the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program. And we definitely need staff members because so far much of the focus of our research has been on faculty, but we also need to find out what are some of the issues that staff members at UF deal with as well, and why are we having so much trouble recruiting and retaining staff as well. Okay, so are there any other questions? Okay. All right, if you have questions after the program ends, you can feel free to email me, Sharon Austin, and I can just put my email address in the chat really quickly, and I can also just refer you to anyone else on our committee if you have any questions. So there's my email address, and I want to thank you all very much for spending your time on Zoom. I think all of us are kind of sick of Zoom now, but there are always so many interesting programs. I always say that I'm tired of Zoom, but I always participate in them because they're so interesting. I want to thank you all again. I want to welcome the new faculty and staff, and also I see a lot of familiar faces. Thank you all very much for coming out and for supporting our project. Have a good evening, everybody.